Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And if you've been following the channel, you know that for the last 3 weeks, I've been doing an in-depth Morgoth series. And that series is just chock full of the legendarium, pretty much every important moment that happens in the First Age. It's been really, really in-depth. So I thought today we'd do a little palate cleanser, something a little more self-contained, and we're going to away from the First Age. We're gonna stick with the Third Age in the events of the Lord of the Rings. And one of the things I like to do is find that obscure place or character and then show how that obscure thing actually impacts the story we know as Lord of the Rings. And I've got that subject today. All right. You would be forgiven for forgetting the name Gildor Inglorion. Because I did. But when I went back and started researching this character, he's an elf, I found out he actually, directly or indirectly, saves Frodo's life 4 times on Frodo's way to Rivendell. He keeps Frodo alive, essentially. So it's a pretty big part, I'll say. And yet, he's not in the movies. And you can understand why. Peter Jackson had to make some edits somewhere, and Gildor probably would easily hit the cutting room floor. So, I can understand why Gildor didn't make it into celluloid. But he does have an interesting role to play. Frodo first encounters Gildor while he's still in the Shire. That's how early in the story this is. Frodo has set off on his journey. He's got Sam, Merry, and Pippin with him. They avoided a Black Rider. The scene, it's in the movies where, they're hiding underneath the roots of a tree and the Black Rider almost finds them but doesn't. Frodo's tempted to put the ring on but resists the urge. All right, so they've done that. A little while later, a second Black Rider, maybe it's the first Black Rider who's just come back around and is doing a circuit, but in any case, they run into a Black Rider for the second time. And I'm going to read you the little passage here because basically they are saved at the last second by Gildor and his company. So here you go. This is the events. They're hiding again. They're using the same technique. Hide from the Black Rider. The shadow bent to the ground and then began to crawl towards him. Once more, the desire to slip on the ring came over Frodo, but this time it was stronger than before, so strong that almost before he realized what he was doing, his hand was groping in his pocket. But at that moment, there came a sound like mingled song and laughter. Clear voices rose and fell in the starlit air. The black shadow straightened up and retreated. It climbed onto the shadowy horse and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. Frodo breathed again. "Elves!" exclaimed Sam in a hoarse whisper. "Elves, sir." So, in that moment, Tolkien is saying that the urge to put on the ring is actually stronger than it was in the previous moment when he almost put on the ring in the first encounter with the Black Rider. I think the suggestion is, if the elves hadn't come along when they did, Frodo probably puts the ring on, alerts the Black Riders, including the one that's standing 5 feet away from him, and Sauron ends up with the ring. I think that's kind of what we're talking right now. So it's very fortuitous that these elves who are traveling showed up. So Frodo meets up with these elves. Gildor actually knows who Frodo is. He's met Bilbo a few times, and he has seen Frodo in Bilbo's company, and so actually addresses Frodo by his name, which kind of freaks Frodo out a little bit. How do you know who I am? But here's a passage where Gildor explains who he is to Frodo. "Who are you, and who is your lord?" asked Frodo. "I am Gildor," answered their leader, the elf who had first hailed him. "Gildor Inglorion of the house of Finrod. Come now, Frodo. Tell us, what are you doing? For we see that there is some shadow of fear upon you." "Oh, wise people," interrupted Pippin eagerly. "Tell us about the Black Riders." "Black Riders?" they said in low voices. Why do you ask about Black Riders? A couple of interesting things there. One, obviously Pippin, big mouth. Black Riders! You're like, okay, zip it with the Black Rider talk. But anyway, now the cat's out of the bag, and the elves are all, standing around them in this circle. Like, what do you mean about Black Riders? But also, Gildor says he is Gildor Inglorion of the House of Finrod. In the early Legendarium, back when Tolkien's initial drafts, Finrod, the Elven King, who was important in the Beren and Luthien stories back in the day and stuff, he has a son named Inglor. So Inglorion would mean son of Inglor. So I think there maybe once upon a time, Tolkien had the idea that Gildor Inglorion was going to be like a grandkid of Finrod, the Elven King. However, that changed. Finrod didn't have a kid named Inglor eventually. So this is just, he's an elven noble, and he's probably got a dad named Inglor. But also it is important to note he is the leader of this group of elves. Also important, these elves are not going west to the Grey Havens. They're going east towards Rivendell. Why that is, I'll put a pin in it. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But as you would think that most of the elves we see, most of the elves that Frodo has probably seen are traveling to the Grey Havens to get on the boats, to sail to the Undying Lands. This group is not doing that. They seem to be coming from that direction. Gildor is very intuitive, savvy, as most elves are, and he quickly reads kind of the dire situation that Frodo is in. Here's a passage Tolkien writes about that. "You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo," said Gildor. "But I already know a little, and I can read more in your face and in the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt that you will find what you seek, or accomplish what you intend, or that you will ever return. Is that not so?" "It is," said Frodo. So Gildor is getting a lot of information out of Frodo in this moment, whether Frodo wants to tell him or not. But Frodo wants to know about the Black Riders. Now that Pippin's let the cat out of the bag, what are Black Riders? He has that voice. I don't know why. Anyway, Frodo is eager to follow up on this. Because, twice in this last day, they've almost been accosted by these horrible, dark, shadowy things on shadowy horses. So Frodo tries to follow up. "What are the Black Riders? Has Gandalf told you nothing? Nothing about such creatures? Then I think it is not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. For it seems to me that you have set out only just in time, if indeed you are in time. You must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection to you." And Frodo's response is great. "I cannot imagine what information could be more terrifying than your hints and warnings," exclaimed Frodo. And it's true, right? This guy, "What are the Black Riders?" "Look, I don't want to tell you anything, because if I told you, the terror alone would basically make you just shut down emotionally and fail to go on your journey. So I'm just not going to tell you." Frodo's like, how could anything be more terrifying than what you just told me? "It's so terrible, I can't talk about it." Thanks, Gildor. So after this amorphous, scary warning from Gildor, Frodo is trying to question him to say, should I keep going? Or should I just hang out? I mean, I was supposed to wait for Gandalf. Gandalf hasn't shown up. I'm worried about him, but I also feel like I need to, move on. Should I? And, Gildor gives him this advice. "It is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait." And then Frodo says, "It is also said," answered Frodo, "go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes." It's like, ow. I like the fact that Frodo isn't just like in total awe of the elves, right? It's not like, "Oh, elves, whatever you say." Like he's he's annoyed. He's annoyed by Gildor and Gildor's evasiveness. And he's not shy about saying it. I like that relationship between Gildor and Frodo. So eventually Gildor does say, you should just go as quickly as possible. And he also gives him this little bit of advice to say, I also advise this, do not go alone. Take such friends as are trusty and willing. That's important advice. It'll come in to play later, obviously, but the Fellowship of the Ring generally is that notion. It's a central theme of The Lord of the Rings. But Frodo hasn't given up on this idea of what the hell the Black Riders are. And so he brings it up again. Like, okay, we've been talking, you're giving me some advice. Let's go back to the Black Riders. And so I like this passage. I wish you would tell me plainly what the Black Riders are. If I take your advice, I may not see Gandalf for a long while, and I ought to know what is the danger that pursues me. Is it not enough to know that they are servants of the enemy? Answered Gildor. Flee them. Speak no words to them. They are deadly. Ask no more of me. But my heart forebodes that ere all this is ended, you, Frodo, son of Drogo, will know more of these fell things than Gildor Inglorion. May Elbereth protect you. But where will I find the courage? Asked Frodo. That's what I chiefly need. Courage is found in unlikely places, said Gildor. Be of good hope. Sleep now. We'll come back to that in a second, but that line makes me laugh. In the morning we shall have gone, but we will send our messages through the lands. The wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those that have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you Elf Friend. Okay, so he's just finished again rebuffing exactly what the Black Riders are to Frodo. But he does say they're deadly, flee them. Boy, you're going to really run into these things. They're going to come face to face with you. I fear you're probably going to have to meet them, and it's going to be terrible. Anyway, get some sleep. Yep, be a good, just get some shut-eye. We're going to be gone when you wake up. But, hey, whoop. I mean, if I was Frodo in that moment, I think I'd spend the night just like terrified. An owl? As it turns out, I think Frodo does sleep because when they wake up, the elves are gone, which is also interesting in this moment. So, as I'm about to show you, Gildor does some very, very helpful things for Frodo going forward. And he's already helped him, scared off a Black Rider. But why did they leave the hobbits? They're going the same direction. In fact, their destination's probably the same, Rivendell. And yet, they're like, Black Riders are chasing you after you, and Gandalf is involved in this, and yet Gandalf's disappeared, and you're probably defenseless against the Black Riders. And when you were journeying with us yesterday, the Black Riders didn't show up, and they didn't show up all night while you were in our camp. So you know what? Good luck. We're leaving you now. You would think maybe Gildor might think, hey, why don't you journey with us the rest of the way and we'll help protect you. Now maybe Gildor thinks the elves in his party are not, say, of the warrior class, and he thinks that maybe the Black Riders would do them in or something. I don't know. But you would think just the idea of his own sense of justice and goodness, he would think, I don't want to abandon this obviously important hobbit to, deal with the 9 Black Riders on his own. But in any case, that's what happens. And it works out for the best. So maybe Gildor had some kind of foresight and realized this is how I can best help Frodo. Also, it's interesting, he had to have an inkling of what this was all about, right? If he knows the Black Riders, and he does, so he knows what they are. He knows that they are slaves to the rings. The fact that Gandalf is really interested, and the Black Riders are apparently, and Sauron is somehow interested in this particular hobbit who is trying to journey to Rivendell and has some kind of a burden he's bearing. I think maybe, as I mentioned, elves are pretty savvy. They're the Sherlock Holmes of the Tolkien world. I think maybe he might have thought, does he have the ring? Anyway, but he doesn't, and so whatever. But it's just interesting that the elves abandon the hobbits, but are, as I'm about to show you, helpful in their own way. Just to give you another example of how annoyed Frodo was with Gildor, there's a great conversation that happens after Gildor has left the following morning. So the elves have departed, hobbits are having breakfast, and Merry and Pippin are really interested to know how that conversation with Gildor went. Hey, did you find out about the Black Riders? They also reference the sniffing, which, the Black Riders do that, and so they can kind of track the ring by scent. And so they're very interested. They want to know, and Frodo's response is great. Did you find out anything about them from Gildor? Not much, only hints and riddles, said Frodo evasively. Did you ask about the sniffing? We didn't discuss it, said Frodo with his mouth full. You should have. I'm sure it's very important. In that case, I'm sure Gildor would have refused to explain it, said Frodo sharply. So, again, it's like, damn you, Gildor. Anyway, it's just funny that Frodo's coming off kind of curmudgeonly in this moment. So right after that conversation, the one where Frodo disses Gildor, Frodo is deciding whether or not to go forward on his own or should his friends accompany him. And Merry and Pippin are basically adamant that they're going to join him. And it's Gildor's advice is referenced here, because what happened was, during that conversation that Gildor had with Frodo, Sam, who was pretending to be asleep, actually was eavesdropping and heard the whole conversation. So Sam brings it up to Frodo in this moment. Anyway, there it is. We know most of what Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We are horribly afraid, but we are coming with you, or following you like hounds. And after all, sir, said Sam, you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gildor said you should take them as willing, and you can't deny it. I don't deny it, said Frodo, looking at Sam, who was now grinning. You are a set of deceitful scoundrels, he said, turning to the others, but bless you, I give in. I will take Gildor's advice. If the danger were not so dark, I should dance for joy. Okay, so would Merry and Pippin have joined him with or without Gildor's advice? Yes. But it's just interesting that that's kind of the straw that broke the Oliphant's back is, yeah, we want to come with you. And remember, Gildor, the wise elf, just said you should take the ones you trust. So, and that's what kind of pushes Frodo over the edge to say, all right, fine, great, you're joining me. So we give Gildor a little credit there for at least being somehow involved in having the company stay together. So as they journey, well, first to Bree, there are these little moments along the way. Obviously, they're saved by Tom Bombadil in the old forest. And it's Tom who references Gildor. It was also clear that Tom had dealings with the elves, and it seemed that in some fashion news had reached him from Gildor concerning the flight of Frodo. So Gildor has sent word to Tom Bombadil to say, look out for these hobbits. They're going to need you. They're probably going to be journeying through the forest. Help them out. And obviously help them out he does. He saves them a couple of times. So we can give Gildor credit, I think, for having Tom Bombadil be on the lookout for these guys. Then, when they get to Bree and they meet up with Strider, I think Gildor is responsible for Strider being there to obviously save their ass. Aragorn saves them how many times throughout the books, but particularly in Bree, he's the one that's like, maybe we should switch rooms, and saves them in that moment. But you get the idea that perhaps Aragorn was just there in Bree because Gandalf said, hey, I've got Frodo coming, meet up with him. But Aragorn hadn't, at this point, Aragorn hadn't spoken with Gandalf in 6 months. So he doesn't know when Frodo's going to be happening through town. It is more than just fortuitous that he happens to be there at the right time. The reason he's there is because of Gildor. And here is the quote that proves that point. "When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing, and the horsemen had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later they told me you had left your home, but there was no news of your leaving Buckland. I've been watching the East Road anxiously." So there it is. Gildor is pretty much responsible for having Aragorn find Frodo and company as early as he did. So we're going to put that in the positive column for Gildor again. You abandoned the hobbits to their fate, but you warned Tom and you warned Aragorn. And he's also going to warn a third person, Elrond. So what we see is, as they're moving on towards Rivendell, Glorfindel, the elf, comes and basically rides Frodo the rest of the way, kind of through the dangers of the Nine Riders. In the movies, Glorfindel was replaced by Arwen. She's the one that rides, Frodo to safety. But it's Glorfindel in the books. In fact, I should probably do a video on Glorfindel because he has a very rich history in the mythos. But here is where they meet up with Glorfindel. And again, we get kind of proof. It doesn't say Gildor specifically, but it's Gildor's folk that are responsible for Glorfindel showing up. "This is Glorfindel, who dwells in the house of Elrond," said Strider. "Hail, and well met at last," said the elf lord to Frodo. "I was sent from Rivendell to look for you. We feared that you were in danger upon the road." "Then Gandalf has reached Rivendell?" cried Frodo joyfully. "No. He had not when I departed, but that was 9 days ago," answered Glorfindel. "Elrond received news that troubled him. Some of my kindred, journeying in your land beyond the Baranduin, learned that things were amiss and sent messages as swiftly as they could." This is Gildor's folk. "They said that the Nine were abroad and that you were astray, bearing a great burden without guidance, for Gandalf had not returned." So, yeah, that's Gildor again. So Gildor, as I mentioned, he saves his life 4 times. First, scares off the Black Rider. Second, warns Tom. Tom saves them from the trees and also from the barrow mounds. Warns Aragorn. Aragorn, how many times does Aragorn save them? But we figure eventually Aragorn would have joined up with them, let's say in Rivendell, the Fellowship of the Ring. But if not for Gildor, there wouldn't have been a Fellowship of the Ring because the Black Riders would have caught Frodo. Hence, Sauron would have had the ring. The war would be over. Count him for the Aragorn benefit. And then Elrond / Glorfindel also saves Frodo from the Nine in that moment. So, tick, 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 tick. Gildor saves the day for Frodo and the War of the Ring. Now, I mentioned that Gildor and his group were heading east to Rivendell instead of west to the Grey Havens, and that might be important. Here's what they were doing. They were coming from the Tower Hills. The Tower Hills basically overlook the Grey Havens. They are so named because there are 3 towers that stand on these hills. Actually, after the War of the Ring, the Tower Hills become the western border of the Shire. That's how far the Shire extends. So it's very, very close to the western border of the Shire. But this area is very important. And the reason it's important involves the Seeing Stones, the Palantiri. I've done a video about the Palantiri, but a quick recap. If you remember, Elendil, when he comes from the sunken Numenor island, he brings with him 7 Seeing Stones. And just a quick recap of where all those stones are, right? So we've got, obviously, the one from Orthanc. That's the one that Saruman was using to communicate with Sauron. You've got the one that was in Minas Tirith that Denethor used and basically was driven suicidal by communicating with Sauron. Sauron's got one. He had one in Barad-dûr. That was originally in the Tower of Minas Ithil. When that was captured, became Minas Morgul. Sauron's like, oh, check it out. I'll take that. Whoop. Hey, seeing stone. So that's 3 stones, right? 2 other stones were in a boat along with King Arvedoe that was up in the frigid north and sank. And they sank into the waters and are gone. So that's 2 more. So that's 5 stones. The 6th stone was one of the master stone at Osgiliath. It was kept in the Dome of Stars. When the city was destroyed, that huge stone fell into the Anduin River, never to be seen again. That's 6 stones. What's the 7th stone? Well, the 7th stone is at the Tower Hills. It's a very unique stone, and it's also called Elendil's stone. The 3 towers in the Tower Hills were not built by the Númenóreans. They were actually built by the elves. King Gil-galad built it for Elendil. I think specifically to house one of the Palantiri. So the tallest of the 3 towers, Elostirion, is where this particular seeing stone resides. And Elendil would come up and gaze into it, at his leisure. What makes this stone unique is, if you think of the 7 Palantiri as like a network, right? This particular stone was unplugged from the network. The other 6 stones all could talk to each other. This stone was isolated and did not talk to any of the other 6 stones. Instead, this stone looked west. And so this was, in Elendil's quieter moments, he would go up and look to the west, and he could actually see some part of the Undying Lands through this stone. He would also look, actually, for Númenor, maybe hoping it had risen back from the depths of the ocean or that, but he never found it. Or maybe he thought he could look underwater and he would see like this Atlantean thing. But in any case, he never saw Númenor, but he did gaze upon the west. And I think the way that worked was there is actually an 8th seeing stone. It's another master stone. And it's held in the Tower of Avallone, which is on a small island just off the coast of the Undying Lands. And so I think that huge master stone that was just off the coast of the Undying Lands could communicate with Elendil's stone, which is essentially on the coast of Middle-earth. And so, he would use that stone to gaze at the Undying Lands. How this relates to Gildor is that Gildor was leading a group of elves on a pilgrimage of sorts. It seems like the elves would make either seasonal or yearly pilgrimages to the Tower Hills to gaze into Elendil's stone in an attempt to get a vision of Varda, the Queen of the Valar. She's also known as Elbereth. Remember, there's in one of the quotes I read to you earlier today, Gildor says, may Elbereth protect you. When he says Elbereth, he's referring to Varda, Queen of the Valar. Supposedly, they could see Varda through the stone. I assume they didn't make these pilgrimages all the time to see nothing. So I think the idea is that they would look through Elendil's stone. That would connect to the Master Stone in the Tower of Avallone off the coast of the Undying Lands. And that stone would look onto the coastline. And there, I guess, maybe at certain times of the year, Varda would appear and they could see her in the distance and basically be heartened by the fact that, the Valar, they're still there. And so he's making that pilgrimage. And at that moment, they're returning from the pilgrimage back to Rivendell. So interestingly, war is now over. We've got that bit where Frodo and Bilbo and Galadriel and Elrond and Gandalf are all going to get on a boat at the Grey Havens and sail west, right? Back to the Undying Lands. That's the time when we see Gildor again. So we saw him in the Fellowship of the Ring. He's not in the books after that until the very end. And he shows up. He's traveling with Frodo and Bilbo and Elrond and Gandalf to the Grey Havens. It's not specifically stated that he gets on the boat with them, but I think it's strongly implied. This is when he decided to leave Middle-earth And he was on the same boat with Elrond and the rest. And the interesting point on that is Círdan actually takes seeing Elendil's stone from Elostirion, the Tower Hills, and puts it onto the boat. And so that stone then sails west with Gildor and the rest. It was originally created by Fëanor, the elven smith, and so it's returning to where it was created. And so they wouldn't need the pilgrimages anymore, since the stone would not be there. They would be walking up the steps of an empty tower. And then, so it's interesting that when Gildor leaves, it's also the last day that you could possibly make that pilgrimage. So that was Gildor Inglorion. You know, an elf who was maddeningly vague, at the same time being very unhelpful, but also incredibly helpful. And as I say, I think directly or indirectly saved Frodo's life 4 different times. Yeah, there you go. If you've got a topic you'd like me to talk about, put it in the comments. Be happy to do a video on a topic of your choosing. Yay, Gildor Inglorion. See you next time, guys. Bye.